Michael Chen had it all: a multi-million-dollar tech company, a penthouse in Silicon Valley, designer suits, expensive cars, everything money could buy. But when his grandmother died, he felt nothing, just emptiness. He flew home to oversee the estate sale, ready to auction off her entire life in a few hours. That's when he found a hidden recipe box in the back of a kitchen cabinet. Inside was a letter that would destroy his perfect life and rebuild it into something he never knew he needed. Recipe number 1 had a strange instruction. Share it with someone who needs healing today. Look for the person everyone else ignores. What happened next made him abandon everything: his company, his wealth, his entire identity, for something far more valuable. This is the true story of how 52 recipes from a dead grandmother saved a man who thought he had everything but had nothing at all. It was a cold December morning when Michael Chen walked into his late grandmother's house for the last time. The 38-year-old tech entrepreneur had flown in from Silicon Valley to oversee the estate sale, a task he'd been dreading for weeks. His grandmother, Margaret Chen, had passed away 3 months earlier at the age of 92, taking with her decades of family memories and, he thought, all her secrets. Michael hadn't been close to his grandmother in recent years. Success had consumed him, building his startup, securing funding, chasing the next big deal. Their conversations had dwindled to obligatory holiday phone calls, where he'd spend most of the time distracted by emails. The guilt gnawed at him now as he walked through her small, outdated kitchen with its vintage appliances and faded linoleum floors. The estate sale company would arrive in 2 hours to catalogue everything. Michael was supposed to remove any personal items he wanted to keep before strangers picked through his grandmother's life, reducing it to price tags and auction lots. But as he opened drawers and cabinets, he felt nothing but emptiness. Old dishes, worn utensils, a life that seemed so small compared to his glass and steel existence. Then he found the recipe box. It was tucked in the back of a bottom cabinet, behind a stack of ancient cookbooks. The wooden box was hand-painted with faded flowers, clearly decades old. Michael almost tossed it aside. He couldn't cook, had no interest in cooking, survived entirely on takeout and meal delivery services. But something made him open it. Inside were hundreds of recipe cards, all written in his grandmother's distinctive shaky handwriting. Margaret's famous dumplings, Sunday pot roast, Christmas sugar cookies. Each card was stained and worn, evidence of countless uses. Michael felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name, regret, maybe, or loss, for a world he'd never really known. He was about to close the box when he noticed something odd. One card at the very back was different, newer. The handwriting was shakier, clearly written recently, and the title made him freeze. Recipe for Michael. Open when you're ready to remember. His hands trembled as he pulled out the card. It wasn't a recipe at all. It was a letter. "My dearest Michael," it began. "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're probably standing in my kitchen wondering why you came. You're probably feeling guilty for not calling more, for missing my last birthday, for being too busy with your important life to visit an old woman who just wanted to hear your voice. I want you to know something. I was never angry. I was proud, so proud of everything you became. But I also watched you lose something precious along the way. You lost the ability to slow down, to taste life instead of just consuming it, to remember where you came from. So, I'm giving you a challenge, my brilliant, successful, lonely grandson. In this box are 52 recipes, one for each week of the year. I want you to cook them, all of them, one per week. No skipping, no substitutions, no ordering the dish from a restaurant and pretending you made it. I'll know." Michael could almost hear her playful tone, But here's the twist. You can't cook them alone. Each recipe must be made with someone, a friend, a neighbor, a stranger, someone who needs connection as much as you do. And when you finish all 52, you'll receive something I've left for you, something that will explain everything. The instructions are simple. Cook, share, connect. Remember what it means to be human. With all my love, even when you forgot to call, Grandma Margaret P.S. Start with recipe number 1, Grandmother's Healing Soup. Trust me on this one. Michael read the letter 3 times, his eyes burning with tears. He hadn't allowed himself to cry at the funeral. This was insane. He didn't have time for this. He had a company to run, investors to please, a product launch in 8 weeks. He couldn't possibly commit to 52 weeks of cooking with random people. He pulled out his phone to call his assistant, to tell her to extend his stay by just 1 day so he could sort through more items. But his finger hovered over the screen. Something in his grandmother's words had cracked something open inside him, a loneliness he'd been ignoring for years, a hunger that no amount of success could satisfy. Almost without deciding to, he found himself pulling out recipe number 1. Grandmother's Healing Soup, the card read. Below the ingredients and instructions was a note. This soup has healed 3 generations of broken hearts, sick bodies, and lonely souls. Share it with someone who needs healing today. Look for the person everyone else ignores. Michael looked at the clock. The estate sale company would be here in 90 minutes. He should be practical, efficient, focused. Instead, he found himself reading through the ingredient list, then searching his grandmother's cabinets and finding, miraculously, that everything he needed was there, as if she'd known he'd find the box today. He started cooking, following the instructions carefully, his hands clumsy and uncertain. The soup began to simmer, filling the kitchen with a smell that unlocked memories he didn't know he had. Being 5 years old, sick with flu, his grandmother sitting by his bed with a steaming bowl. Being 12 and heartbroken over his first crush, finding comfort in her kitchen. Being 17 and angry at the world, slowly calming as they cooked together in silence. When had he stopped coming to this kitchen? When had he decided that success meant leaving all of this behind? The soup was nearly done when Michael heard a sound outside, someone crying. He looked through the kitchen window and saw an elderly woman sitting on the front steps of the house next door. She was hunched over, shoulders shaking, completely alone. Look for the person everyone else ignores. Without overthinking it, Michael ladled soup into 2 bowls, grabbed spoons, and walked outside. The December cold hit him immediately, but he kept walking until he reached the crying woman. "Excuse me," he said softly. "I'm Margaret Chen's grandson. I just made her healing soup and I have way too much for one person. Would you like to share it with me?" The woman looked up, startled. Her eyes were red and swollen, her face marked by years of hard living. "Margaret's grandson? She talked about you all the time, said you were going to change the world." Michael felt shame wash over him. "I don't know about that, but I do know this soup is her recipe, and it's supposed to be shared. May I sit?" The woman nodded, and Michael sat beside her on the cold steps, handing her a bowl. They ate in silence for several minutes, the steam rising between them like a bridge. "I'm Dorothy," the woman finally said. "I lived next to your grandmother for 30 years. She was the only person who still checked on me after my husband died, the only one who remembered my birthday, and now she's gone and I'm just so alone." Michael listened as Dorothy talked, really listened, something he realized he hadn't done in years. She told him about her children who never called, her grandchildren she'd never met, her fear of dying alone and forgotten, just like she feared Margaret had. "But she didn't die forgotten," Michael said quietly. "She left behind this." He gestured to the soup, to the moment they were sharing. "She's still bringing people together, even now." They finished their soup as the winter sun struggled through grey clouds. When Dorothy stood to leave, she hugged Michael tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "I didn't know how much I needed this. Your grandmother would be so proud." After Dorothy left, Michael sat alone on the steps, staring at his grandmother's house with new eyes. He pulled out his phone and did something he never did. He called his assistant and told her to cancel everything for the next 3 days. Then he called the estate sale company and postponed indefinitely. He was going to stay. He was going to cook recipe number 2 tomorrow and number 3 the day after. He didn't know how he'd manage 52 weeks, didn't know how this would work with his company, his life, his carefully constructed world of efficiency and success. But for the first time in years, Michael felt something other than emptiness. He felt purpose, connection, hope. Over the following weeks, Michael's life transformed in ways he never imagined. Recipe number 2, comfort chicken for new mothers, led him to a young single mom in the neighborhood who was struggling. Recipe number 7, birthday cake for forgotten celebrations, he made with a homeless veteran he met at a shelter. Recipe Nachu 15, reconciliation roast, he cooked with his estranged father, leading to their first real conversation in a decade. Each recipe came with a note from his grandmother, sometimes funny, sometimes wise, always knowing exactly what he needed to hear. Each meal connected him with someone new, someone struggling, someone seeking the same thing he was, authentic human connection in a world that had become increasingly isolated. His company didn't collapse without his constant presence. In fact, his leadership team thrived with more autonomy. His productivity didn't suffer, it improved, because for the first time in years, he was actually resting, actually refueling his soul, instead of just his ambition. Recipe de Soup 26, soup for the sick, he made with his grandmother's former doctor, who told him stories about Margaret's final months, how she'd spent them writing recipes, planning this entire journey, determined to teach her grandson one last lesson. "She said you'd become successful," the doctor told him, "but she worried you'd forgotten how to be happy." By recipe number 40, Michael had started a blog sharing his journey. The posts went viral, thousands of people resonating with his story of rediscovering connection through cooking. Several reached out to share their own experiences, creating a movement of people committing to cook and share meals with others. Finally, after 52 weeks, Michael prepared the final recipe, grandmother's love cake. The card instructed him to bake it alone, in her kitchen, on the anniversary of her death. As the cake baked, filling the house with the smell of vanilla and cinnamon, Michael found a sealed envelope taped to the inside of the recipe box lid. His hands shook as he opened it. Inside was a key and another letter. "My dearest Michael, if you're reading this, you completed all 52 recipes. I knew you would. Not because you're obedient, but because somewhere deep inside you were starving for exactly what these recipes provided: connection, purpose, meaning. This key opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank downtown. Inside, you'll find the deed to my house. It's yours now, paid off, no strings attached. But it comes with one condition. You must use it to continue what you started. Turn my kitchen into a community space. Teach others to cook. Feed the lonely. Create connection. Build the life I always knew you were meant to live. Not one measured in stock prices and valuations, but in lives touched and hearts healed. You spent a year learning that success without soul is just expensive emptiness. Now go build something that matters. I love you more than you ever knew, and I'm so proud of the man you've become. Not the CEO, but the person who sat on cold steps sharing soup with a grieving neighbor. That's my real grandson. Welcome home. Forever yours, Grandma Margaret. P.S. The cake you just baked, eat it with everyone you cooked with this year. Celebrate what you've built. Then get to work on your next 52 recipes. Michael stood in his grandmother's kitchen, his kitchen now, tears streaming down his face, the smell of cake filling the air, his phone buzzing with messages from the 43 people he'd cooked with over the past year, all asking when they'd cook together again. He thought about the life he'd left in Silicon Valley, the corner office, the stock options, the empty apartment with its restaurant-quality kitchen he'd never used. Then he thought about Dorothy next door, about the single mother he now babysat for twice a week, about the veteran who'd become his friend, about his father with whom he now had dinner every Sunday. The choice was obvious. 6 months later, Margaret's kitchen opened its doors. The house had been transformed into a community cooking space where anyone could come to learn, to cook, to connect. Michael taught classes, hosted community dinners, and created a program pairing isolated elderly people with busy professionals for weekly cooking sessions. His tech company? He'd sold his shares to his leadership team, taking a modest payout that was enough to fund the kitchen and live simply. He'd traded his BMW for a used pickup truck that he filled with groceries for his cooking classes. He'd traded his designer suits for jeans and aprons covered in flour. And he'd never been happier. On the 1-year anniversary of Margaret's kitchen, more than 200 people gathered for a celebration. Every single person Michael had cooked with, plus dozens more whose lives had been touched by his grandmother's final gift. Dorothy stood up to give a toast. "A year and a half ago, I was sitting on my front steps, crying because I thought I'd lost the only person who still saw me. Then Margaret's grandson appeared with a bowl of soup and reminded me that her love didn't die with her. It multiplied. Here's to Margaret Chen, who knew that the best recipe for a meaningful life is simple: cook with love, share with generosity, and never eat alone." The room erupted in applause. Michael looked around at the faces, young and old, rich and poor, lonely souls who'd found family in a kitchen built on 52 recipes and one grandmother's unshakable belief that her grandson would find his way home. That night, as Michael cleaned up the kitchen, he found one more card he'd never noticed before, tucked behind a loose tile near the stove. It was in his grandmother's handwriting, dated the week before she died. "Michael, if you found this, it means you're really paying attention now. Good. One more recipe for you. Recipe No. 53. A life worth living. Ingredients: 1 open heart, several cups of courage, a generous portion of time, unlimited love, and people, as many as you can find. Instructions: mix ingredients daily. Share freely. Never stop cooking, never stop connecting, never stop remembering that the best things in life are made by hand, shared with others, and seasoned with love. Serves everyone who walks through your door. Storage. This recipe never expires. It only gets better with time. Now get cooking, my darling boy. The world is hungry for what you have to offer. With eternal love, your grandma." Michael pressed the card to his chest, looking around the kitchen, once his grandmother's, now his, soon to belong to everyone who needed it. Through the window, he could see Dorothy arriving early to help with tomorrow's bread-making class, and the single mom he'd met months ago, now his assistant director, laughing as she carried in supplies. He thought about the man he'd been a year and a half ago, successful, wealthy, important, and profoundly alone. Then he thought about who he was now, covered in flour, surrounded by friends, living in his grandmother's old house, running a non-profit that barely paid the bills. By every metric he'd once valued, he'd failed spectacularly. By every metric that actually mattered, he'd finally succeeded. Michael smiled, pulling out the ingredients for tomorrow's recipe. Friendship bread for new beginnings. And got to work. He had a lot of people to feed, a lot of connections to nurture, and a lifetime of recipes still to cook. His grandmother had been right about everything. The recipe for a meaningful life was simple: cook, share, connect, love, and never, ever forget where you came from. Because sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money or property. It's the wisdom to know that a life well lived is measured not in what you achieve, but in how many people you invite to your table and how deeply you nourish their souls along with their bodies. Margaret Chen had understood this truth, and through 52 recipes and one wooden box hidden in a cabinet, she'd finally taught it to her grandson. The lesson was complete. The real work was just beginning. And in a small kitchen that smelled perpetually of soup, bread, and love, a new legacy was being written. One meal, one connection, one recipe at a time.